Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for this post-lunch session of Practical Granulomatous Inflammation 1. So, I am myself Dr. Deepshikha Dave, and I'll be taking practical points on granulomatous inflammation 1. I will be briefing you about a little theoretical part before going into the details of granulomatous inflammation, both in pathology. So, first of all, we will have a look what is inflammation. Inflammation is the response of a vascularized tissue towards any injury. It could be anything, bacteria, virus, or it could be an external injury, trauma, burns, anything. So, inflammation is basically divided into acute and chronic, depending on the time period it takes for the body or the vascularized tissue to present a response. So, acute ones basically varies from minutes to hours to days early, and in chronic inflammation it usually takes days or months to develop. Now chronic inflammation has been subdivided into two more categories. So one is non-specific chronic inflammation and the other one is chronic granulomatous inflammation. So in non-specific chronic inflammation, we are basically dealing with lymphocytes or the mononuclear cells which are dispersed throughout in the body in that particular tissue where the injurious agent has been entrapped. And when we talk about chronic granulomatous inflammation, it basically represents a specific type of inflammation which is chronic. Now, etiology, it can be bacterial. The bacterial ones are divided primarily into tuberculosis, leprosy, and syphilis. Why we are talking about this? Especially in a country like India where TB is very common, even the leprosy is very common. If you are dealing with a chronic granulomatous inflammation, the primary etiology that should come to your mind is TB, leprosy, and syphilis. Then some other comparatively rarer causes are granuloma inguinale, brucellosis, cat scratch disease, and tularemia. In fungal, it is basically actinomycosis, blastomycosis, cryptococcosis, and coccidiomycosis. Parasitic, most common is schistosomiasis. Now some miscellaneous causes are sarcoidosis, Crohn's disease, silicosis, berylliosis, foreign body granuloma. Now let's talk about a little about pathogenesis. So basically there is an antigen presenting cell over here. Can you see? So this antigen presenting cell could be either a dendritic cell or a macrophage. So if it is unable to digest this foreign material, which could either be a non-immunogenic foreign body or a immunogenic like bacteria or fungi, then it gives rise to a T helper 1 response. So this T helper 1 response is basically because of the presence of interleukin 12 released within the body. Now this T helper 1 cells releases interferon gamma and give rise to the macrophage collection and its activation. So this macrophage will basically undergo the primary or the classical pathway of maturation. It will divide itself as well as give rise to pro-inflammatory cytokines which will be helping in the inflammation. Now, when a macrophage cannot contain that particular response, if it is unable to digest this material, then the macrophage will try to limit that stimuli to not actually go inside the body. So for that, they give rise to the formation of an epithelioid cell. So what is basically an epithelioid cell? It is a modified macrophage which is seen in chronic granulomatous inflammations. So now here can you see there is a cluster of macrophages. So these are basically the macrophages. These are activated macrophages. And what you find here are elongated cells which are slipper shaped. So these kind of cells which have got a morphology similar to that of an epithelial cell. How an epithelial cell? It contains abundant cytoplasm and that's why it gives its look similar to that of an epithelial cell inside our body, and this is what is basically seen in granulomas. So this typical slipper shaped cell nuclei. Now this is a histological section So you will be seeing here this line. This whole line is basically of the epithelioid cells, and they are trying to limit the inflammation over here. Now what is this? This is also a part of chronic granulomatous inflammation. It is called a giant cell. Now giant cells are basically divided into two major types. They can either be foreign body type of giant cells for non-immunogenic foreign bodies, and they could be of other specialized type known as Langerhans type of giant cells, in which they have got the orientation of the nuclei like the shape of C or a complete circle. So these Langerhans type of giant cells can also be seen. Now we will be dealing about one major thing in chronic granulomatous inflammation. Whenever we are talking about chronic granulomatous inflammation, the first thing that should come to our mind, especially in a country like India, should be tuberculosis. So we'll go about a little about the etiology. So the etiology is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which is basically divided into 5 strains according to human, buffalo, cow, or avian. So it is divided like that: M. tuberculosis, hominis, bovinis, then avian. Now we'll talk about the pathogenic ones. So basically 2 pathogenic ones are there which are highly pathogenic. So one is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, hominis and bovis. When we talk about Mycobacterium avium, then usually it forms a complex which is known as Mycobacterium avium intracellulare, and it is usually seen in HIV positive or immunosuppressed individuals. Now modes of spread. So how do we know TB? How does TB get spread? It is basically by the droplet infection. The person-to-person contact with an open case can give rise to direct transmission through droplets, or these droplets can dry over surfaces by spitting or coughing, and then it can basically be contaminating your surfaces. If the person touches that, it can either contaminate your skin, or directly if you are touching your nose or mouth, it can go there. Now, so primarily by the mode of spread, if we are talking about droplet infection, so what will be the main organ which will be involved? It will be the lungs. Second is the intestinal TB, which is again very common in India. How does it happen? Basically, a person swallows its own sputum when he is infected by an open case of tuberculosis. And this sputum basically goes into the GIT and causes intestinal tuberculosis. Other is if the cow from which you are getting the milk is not pasteurized, and if that cow is suffering from M. bovinis, then it can also give rise to tuberculosis of intestine. So by drinking infected milk, you can have intestinal tuberculosis. Now the types. So basically TB is divided into primary tuberculosis and secondary tuberculosis. What do you understand by primary? Primary means the first encounter of the agent by the body. So it is primary response that a body shows, or the primary features that are a body creating within the body, within itself to basically cure the disease from. And secondary tuberculosis, that means it could be either a continuation from the primary, it could be either reactivation after days or months or even years when your immune system gets suppressed, or it could be the reinfection by a new open case. So when we are talking about primary tuberculosis, in most of the cases it gets healed. So healing type is the basic pathology that we are seeing with primary, but it could be progressive, especially in cases where there is no immunity within the particular patient who is suffering from this. And primary TB is usually encountered in children. So those children which are on immunosuppressive therapy or having a poor immune system will give rise to primary progressive pulmonary tuberculosis. Then secondary is basically usually progressive. It is non-healing type until and unless you cure it by giving anti-tubercular treatment. So progressive TBs are basically again divided into 2 major types, fibrocaseous and miliary. So fibrocaseous is basically local proliferation which is giving rise to fibrocaseating granulomas, and miliary is basically due to the hematogenous spread. We will talk in details later about this. So tuberculosis, as you are seeing here, there is a latent infection, so it is basically healing, getting cured. Then there is a cavitarious lesion. This is cavitary tuberculosis. It could be a progression from the primary tuberculosis, or it could be a progression from the secondary tuberculosis. Then this is miliary. Again, miliary can also be seen in primary progressive as well as secondary progressive. So what you are seeing here is a healing ulcer. Here it is a cavity formation. Here there is large spread within the whole lung with cavities all over. So gross. Why a pathologist need to look at the gross? Because half of the diagnosis of the pathologist rely on the gross morphology of anything. When we are talking about tuberculosis, when there are small granulomas, we should know that the granulomas are basically 1 mm in diameter. When they start caseating, they start taking up more space, and that's why they become enlarged more than 1 mm. So those tubercles which are 1 mm in size will not be recognized in gross, but when they are having a central caseation, then they will be easily recognized by the presence of caseous necrosis. And that's why this will give rise to a cheesy appearance to them. So by cheesy we mean morphologically as well as on touching. So it looks yellow as well as it is soft to touch. So that's why it has a cheesy appearance. So this is the basic quality of caseous necrosis that is seen in tuberculosis. So here we will see, look at the gross. What will happen if there is a case of primary tuberculosis? We have to know that what is a Ghon's complex. So it is seen in primary tuberculosis. What is it? Basically, the strata, the bronchi usually give rise to the inoculation of the bacteria within upper pole of the lower lobe of the lung or the lower pole of the upper lobe of the lung. So that's why what happens, there is a caseating granuloma over here. Then they start coalescing, but they are not more than 2 centimeters in size. When they grow, they destruct the whole lung parenchyma over here and give rise to the lymphatic spread. So this lymphatic spread is usually not seen grossly as well as microscopically, but it could be seen microscopically in the form of small miliary tubercles. The second thing that is most noted, or the third thing rather, first, second and third will be the nodes. So the hilar lymph nodes are involved. Again, they will be having a central caseation, and that's why it will give rise to a cheesy necrosis in the center. So Ghon's complex is primarily having a triad of subpleural caseating granulomas. So there are granulomas. There could be pneumonia which would be surrounding this granuloma. There will be pleuritic patch over here. Then this is the one thing. Second thing is the involvement of the lymphatics, and the third thing will be the involvement of the nodes. So this is how the triad goes. So this is how you will see it in gross. This is a gross picture. You are seeing here, this is a caseating area, whole, gross, cheesy in appearance, yellowish, soft to touch. Again, what you are seeing here are hilar lymph nodes, which are again having a central core of caseation. And that's why they are yellow in color. What you are seeing in the next picture again is a basically Ghon's complex, which is again a subpleural patch of caseating granulomatous lesion and hilar lymph nodes. Now, talking about fibrocaseous tuberculosis, we all have undergone, or we all have learned that primary can be progressive as well as secondary can be progressive. So these are the morphological subtyping of either primary progressive tuberculosis or secondary progressive tuberculosis. So fibrocaseous lesions are basically looking like this. These are caseating large lesions. As we all know, granulomas are small. They coalesce together. They form a central core of caseation, which is of the necrotic tissue. Then they conglomerate. And that's why we get matted lymph nodes when we are talking about tuberculosis, either in the axilla or in the lung or anywhere where tuberculous inflammation has taken place. So again, what you see here are small areas of caseating granulomas, and in the apical area, there is a big cavity. Now we should take into notice one thing, that cavity formation usually occurs in the apical areas more, as well as the distribution of this bacilli and the fibrocaseation in secondary tuberculosis is more in the apical area of the lungs, because these tubercle bacilli are basically aerobes, and that's why they thrive on high oxygen tension, and that's why they require apical lobes to flourish. Now, when a cavitarious lesion is formed, is basically the rupture of the caseating material within the bronchi or within the adjoining vessels. When it is rupturing within an adjacent bronchi, it gives rise to the sputum and is also known as clinically an open case. So open case of tuberculosis are very harmful. If you are dealing with that person, you are talking with them, and you are having a low immunity, you are not taking your breakfast and going into the clinics, you will surely catch tuberculosis then. Now again, examples of caseation. So these all are small caseating areas, and this is probably a lung abscess. These are again caseating granulomas. This more or less describes a nice view of how the cavitarious lesions look like. It basically is surrounded by caseous areas, and then there is a cavitarious lesion. Again, can you see here is a cavity which has ruptured, and that's why emptied out all its contents within the bronchi in the form of sputum. Now, talk about miliary tuberculosis. So, when we are saying miliary tuberculosis, it basically represents small tubercles which are millet-shaped in size. This is a very high resolution view of showing how the miliary seeds look like, but you have to guarantee, not every time you can see such beautiful picture that has been given in the Google. Because these usually tubercles are very small. Now, microscopically, we pathologists basically deal with blue and pink areas. So when we are talking about blue and pink, we necessarily mean to say that more of inflammation is giving a blue color and more of the necrosis is giving a pink color, or the cells which are having more cytoplasm are giving a pink color to the structure histologically when we are seeing it. So here we see well-defined, nearly rounded pale areas or granulomas. When a granuloma is in early stage, it is more or less spherical and rounded in shape. But when it grows, it causes central caseous necrosis as well as it causes coalescence of adjoining granulomas. And that's why at that stage, it need not necessarily be spherical in shape. Then margin is darker blue. Why? Because there are large number of lymphocytes. I will be explaining how actually a granuloma looks like under low power as well as high power. And then there are central granular or powdery pink areas of caseous necrosis. A point to be noted when we are talking about pathology, from a pathology point of view, whenever you are explaining cheesy, you need not use that term within the microscopy. You have to use that term for the gross purpose only because the cheese-like appearance is in the gross only. But when we are talking about microscopy, then we will have to represent the caseous necrosis in the form of term powdery or granular. So here is the low power view. This is basically the skin architecture. So maybe the oropharynx or the tonsillar area. So this is the inlet point. Here we can see there is large number of lymphoid architecture over here. So this whole area which looks more the blue, it is basically the lymphocytes. As we all know, the tonsillar area as well as the area of the pharyngeal wall contains good lymphoid aggregates. So that's why this could represent their original lymphoid aggregates. But what you see here is a well-defined lesion which is round. So what you are seeing here are the clusters of giant cells. So these clusters of giant cells as well as these rounded areas are basically representing the granulomas. Again, can you see? Now, this is basically the lymphocytic collar. When you are describing a granuloma in a microscopy, what will you say? It is a cluster of modified macrophages known as epithelioid cells with or without caseous necrosis, or with or without the presence of Langhans type of giant cells. Okay? So basically a granuloma is a collection of epithelioid cells with a large number of lymphocytes at the periphery. So again, can you delineate the pink areas and the blue areas? Again, a high power view showing a Langhans type of giant cells in the center. Then there are epithelioid cells scattered around that Langhans type of giant cell. Again, can you appreciate the blue colored lymphocytic collar in the periphery? Now, this is a low power view. This is a very nice picture. Why? because in addition to what I have shown you previously, it has got one more area. Can you see this area where there are no nuclei, or there are very few karyorectic debris within it? So this area is basically of the caseous necrosis. This is how caseous necrosis looks like in the low power as well as the high power. It is more pinkish in color. Why? All necrosis looks pinkish in color. Why? Because they lose their nuclei. No nuclei, no hematoxylin, so no blue color. Then there is margination of epithelioid cells in the periphery. Can you see these slipper-shaped nuclei here, here, here? Again, what you see here is the presence of Langerhans type of giant cells, which are either having half C or complete round dispersal of nuclei. Again, a very beautiful picture showing upper right corner having caseous necrosis. Then there is a line, whole line of epithelioid cells. Along with there is a Langerhans type of giant cell, which is having nearly round orientation of all the nuclei. Again, a very beautiful picture. Can you see that caseous necrosis area is all pink? There are very few karyorectic debris, if you can see at this resolution. And there is presence of epithelioid cells as well as Langerhans type of giant cells. This beautifully represents a C-shaped Langerhans type of giant cell. Now, few points about intestinal tuberculosis. Whenever we are dealing about intestinal tuberculosis, you can have two varieties. Either you can have tubercles studded over the serosal surface, or you can have the stricture which is occluding the lumen. So this type of stricture is commonly seen in tuberculosis. So whenever we are saying that we are dealing with tuberculosis, it should be a horizontal stricture. Can you see? In the typhoid, there is a longitudinal stricture. We have already discussed it in our chapter of acute inflammation. This is chronic inflammation, and that's why I'm telling you this is a horizontal ulceroproliferative lesion, and that's why sometimes it is confused for malignancy. So that's why pathologists do play a role in categorizing whether the lesion is inflammatory in origin, whether the lesion needs only antibiotics, or the lesion needs removal. So again, what you will see in microscopy, the same picture, caseous necrosis, which is on the left side of you, showing a homogeneous, eosinophilic, granular, powdery appearance. Then there is presence of epithelioid cells. Then there is presence of Langerhans type of giant cells. Again, in orientation of C or polar orientation of their nuclei. So, is finding a well-formed caseating granuloma enough an evidence to give a diagnosis of tuberculosis? What will be your answer? No. Why? Because we have already seen that caseating granulomas also can be caused by a variety of things. Variety of microbes give rise to caseation, or say caseating granulomas. So that's why we will be doing some special stain now. So first is the Ziehl-Neelsen stain. Can you see? Ziehl-Neelsen stain with 20% sulfuric acid give rise to retaining of the carbol-Fustin stain by the bacilli. And that's why these give rise to a bacilli with a beaded appearance. This is how the tubercle bacilli looks like in the Zn stain. So this is a confirmatory test, and we usually say that this has the higher sensitivity and specificity in all cases to diagnose if we are saying that this infection is caused by M. tuberculosis. There is an alternate stain that we can use, which is auramine-rhodomine stain. It is a fluorescent stain. So fluorescent staining usually predicts the presence of acid-fast bacilli. But usually what we see that the lepra bacilli also stains the same way. So if you have to distinguish, you will have to use Zn stain. Why? Because Ziehl-Neelsen stain with 20% sulfuric acid will be giving rise to acid fastness of the M. tuberculosis, whereas with 5% sulfuric acid it will be giving acid fastness to the lepra bacilli. So basically highly sensitive and highly specific stain still remains the Ziehl-Neelsen stain for us. This is the bibliography, Robbins and Cotran. Harsh Mohan sir. Pic credits are as usual Google. I tried to get some pics from our microscope, but they are not of good quality. So that's why explaining them, teaching them with those pictures is very difficult. So I am thankful to Google for giving me those pictures so that I can tell you what exactly things are. Thank you.